Well, hello, ladies and gents. I am Robert Sikes, and I'm accompanied by my other two musketeers, Danny, Vega, and Adam. And we are joined today by the one and the only Rachel Gregory. How are you, Rachel?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Doing wonderfully well. Doing
I'm
wonderful.
awesome, Rachel.
Yeah, it's just good to see you, my friend. It's just great to see you.
Same.
It's funny because like when this whole podcast this idea was poised to me, I'm like, you know what? We're just gonna have the three of us hanging out with other people as guests that we love hanging out with anyway. So it's just basically, if nothing else, this is like a reconvening of the mind. So I'm all about this. So Rachel, we've done multiple podcasts together on my podcast and your podcast. You have a super popular MetFlex and Chill podcast. And you have MetFlex being metabolic flexibility. So that's oftentimes topic of discussion. Today, I'd love for us to touch on that for sure, because there may be some new listeners to this podcast that are not familiar. So I'd love to open the floodgates for any of that kind of as a preface, but then I'd love to turn the conversation to metabolic rehabilitation, as Adam calls it. Basically, how to ramp up your metabolism, how to ensure that you're not chronically under eating, and how that can be applied from a metabolic flexibility standpoint. But before we dive into that, can you give us a little background and basis for what got you into metabolic flexibility, how that became the pillar of your brand and business to date?
Sure. I will try to make this brief because I feel like I always tend to just talk. So as you know, I have been in kind of the keto low carb space for a while. I did the first study on keto in non-elite CrossFit athletes back in 2016, 17. I don't even remember anymore. Back then, a few years ago, dove into the keto space, adopted the lifestyle for myself, got very kind of focused on keto, focused on kind of helping clients who came to me to, embark on a ketogenic diet. And just over the years, I've kind of veered off a little bit and tried different things myself. Kind of went through my own transformation, lost about 20 pounds, did a photo shoot, and through that experience learned a lot about just kind of what I was doing in terms of kind of being super low carb for a long time, and things for me were just not working anymore in terms of that. So I started, implementing more carbs specifically around my workouts, started more of like a targeted approach, and then kind of just went from there and started playing around with this idea of like metabolic flexibility. And I started increasing my carbs and then doing some fasting and seeing if I could get back into ketosis and all of that. And so basically kind of metabolic flexibility is, and I'm sure we'll get into this, just the ability to kind of go back and forth between the two fuel sources that we use for fuel, so carbs and fats, efficiently. And most of America, I would say, is metabolically inflexible just due to the high carbs that are around everywhere and, the standard American diet. And then the other side of the spectrum is, some people have gone low carb for a very long time, keto, and they can become quote unquote metabolically inflexible on that side of things. I would say that's, more rare than the other side. But specifically for women, I've found that implementing carbohydrates strategically can be very useful, especially if they've come to some type of plateau, whether it be with their health, their body composition, those type of things. So, yeah.
No, I love it. I feel like this is such a intriguing topic right now. It's very, very, popular right now within the realms of the discussion in the ketogenic low carb space, because everybody, it's definitely like a keto, 3.0 iteration of level of adaptation. So many people get into the keto low carb space and they just get inundated with information and they start worrying about so many things. And I don't want them to automatically gear towards metabolic flexibility if they never even become fat adaptive. And you and I did like a whole in-depth podcast on this on multiple occasions. But you bring an interesting perspective to the table, because you have been low carb and keto for so long prior to introducing the carbs. So I would love to kind of get both Danny and Adam's take on this, because I don't really know what Adam's done nutritionally speaking. And I know Danny's experimented with a lot of this, and I know what I've done, obviously. But rather than me doing all the talking, I'd love to kind of get into the equation as far as what they've experimented with on, and how Rachel's experience can kind of play into that.
I've been incorporating the Special K diet, the cereal. My background with like my weight loss, carbs are a little bit tricky for me because I can tend to overeat and fall into like food addiction and like I can eat a lot of carbs really fast and I start losing control. So that's something that I've been shying away from. Like I totally could see like good intentions of, all right, I'm going to do a little bit of a carb bump and I'm going to have some sweet potatoes and this and that. But that's like the sweet potato is like the gateway drug to donuts for me. And that's the way it'll tend to go. So knowing myself, I tend to just stick with the meats and the bricks, and that works really well for me. So, and I know Danny has had much more thorough investigations into the carb world. So I will give the mic over to him.
Yeah, I've done a lot of experience, like a lot of experiments. I think like based on, I started like in 2018 or 19, with like 50 grams post workout. That didn't work because I had cravings the rest of the day. And then the next year I realized like if I just eat more carbs the rest of the day, I have more stable blood sugar. So I did that. I did carb ups for 3 months straight in 2019, I believe, and they worked well. But then over time, my inflammation went up, and then 2020, I had carbs for a lot longer. What I find is that for me, if I were to do it, it would be good for me to do it. It's always strategic. It's never because I'm in the mood for like, a donut or something. And I never ate junk. It was always real food. And everyone here agrees with that. And I know Rachel agrees with that as well. I would say that like, if I were to do it, I wouldn't do it regularly. I would do it just like, at a time where maybe other things were going on. Maybe I was stressed. Maybe I wanted to see if it would help me bring my cortisol down because of that insulin bump, and use it like a tool. But I just find that now I'm eating intuitively, and it just feels it's much easier for me to eat intuitively with not ever including carbs. I'll see this summer is going to be the test, because in the summers when I start to get the issues with the cramping and stuff, and then I do get a little bit more carbs in, and it feels better. But what I'll do if I ever do it would be like maybe like do it like once in a month, because I just find like it complicates things for me as I start to do it more. And I have that same thing, Adam, where my hunger will ramp up sometimes, and sometimes what's happened is like I've had a plan, because I'm like, okay, if I'm gonna bump up the carbs, I gotta bring the fat down, and then I don't quite get the satiety, even though, like, again, if I do it one day, it's good. But when I start to do it like regularly, it gets harder. And then I've had days where I've eaten carbs, and then at the end of the day, I throw some fat on it. So you just got to know your body. That's just what I say. Like, know your body, and totally see what Rachel's saying with the women. Like, women seem to do well with certain issues, when they bring some carbs in.
Have you noticed any change in your menstrual cycle, Danny, when you did incorporate the carbs?
Dude, I was super short cycle, super short, and
Hey, I'm the one that announced to my family that I had my period. That we talked about that last last month. You missed that one, Rachel. I was 5 years old, and something happened, and I walked out, and I announced to my entire family that I had just started my period. This might be a good time for another story. Have I ever told you guys the story of my donut eating contest at the Harrodsburg Bridge Festival in Indiana? This is a short story. This will explain my carb addictive nature, and it also explains Indiana very well. So there was a donut eating contest. I'd already lost all my weight, and they're like, it'd be funny to have the gym owner guy, the health guy, come in and do a donut eating contest. Little do they know, I can put them down. So it's me and like 3 people that are probably like a combined 1,000 pounds. Like, they're big people. One of them has no legs, pretty sure, because he has diabetes and has had his legs cut off, and he is in the donut eating contest. All right. So the donut eating contest starts. It's how many donuts can you eat? I think we had like 3 minutes or 5. I think it was 5 minutes. And I ended up putting down 15 donuts in 5 minutes. I blow away the competition. The dude with no legs is getting yelled at by his like toothless girlfriend. That's like, you gonna let that little skinny fella beat you? And then, but another person starts choking and they have to like do the Heimlich on that one. Like it was insane, but I won, and I won a trophy, and that trophy still sits in the gym that I no longer own. That is my story. Thank you and good night.
Very nice.
Great story.
So of the four of us, you are the only female here, Rachel. So you could probably speak with a lot more clarity on why the carbs could potentially be beneficial to the females. So can you kind of shed some light on that? Like what's happening from a hormonal standpoint that could contribute to there being an advantage with the carbs?
Yeah. So I think I want to start first by just kind of talking about, overall calories, right? And that is one of the biggest, I don't necessarily like with where you're coming from, like whether you're increasing your calories from carbs or fats, this is what I think, if you hit a certain threshold where your calories come up to a certain amount, whether that be from carbs and fats for a long enough period of time, especially if you're coming from being a chronic dieter, I feel like that in itself is going to probably take care of a lot of issues, right? Just bumping your calories up. Because we know, especially for females, we have something called relative energy deficiency. That is just basically like, yes, you might be, we have priorities that are happening, right, within our body, right? So if you're chronically undereating and overexercising, which many people are, you are not going to be getting enough. Maybe you're eating at your maintenance intake, for example, but your fuel is going towards the physical activity you're doing. It's going towards your brain, your heart, your liver, and really kind of like your reproductive health, right? Your reproductive hormones are, basically not getting what they need because that's not a priority, right? It's kind of, someone described this as the triage theory. Have you ever heard that before?
I have not.
So, like if you're
is it like when the most what do you call it? The most urgent problem is going to be
exactly
addressed. Yeah.
Exactly. So like if you're triaging at, something's happening and you're triaging, the people who have their arm falling off are going to get more attention than the person who, has a little cut or something like that, right? So it's kind of thinking about how that priority works in your body, like your brain, your heart, your liver, all those things are priority. Your physical activity, you have to be using, if you're physically active, if you're, overexercising, or even if you're just active, like that, energy is coming from somewhere. It has to come from somewhere. So your reproductive health basically takes a back seat. So with all that being said, it's just kind of thinking about, and this is what I've seen, and this has happened for myself too. It's just like, there's many people out there who are just under eating in general. I don't care if it's carbs, fats, protein is a big thing. And that is where probably 90% of things can be fixed if you just up your calories. And also there's like a caveat there because, and this is something that we can talk about, which is kind of that metabolic rehabilitation. If you've been under eating for so long, your body, your metabolism, your hormones have pretty much adapted to that for many people, right? If you're a chronic dieter or a chronic overexerciser, your body is going to adapt to what you're doing because it wants to survive, right? So that's another thing with kind of hormonal health, right? And reproductive health, those things take a back seat. And that is like one of the biggest things. So just increasing your calories. And if you have been, dieting for a long time, if you're a chronic dieter and you're at this kind of plateau where you're consuming 1,400 calories. This is just an example. Like everybody's different, right? Body size, whatever. You're consuming 1,400 calories. You can't lose weight. You're doing all the things. Your body's probably adapted to that intake, right? And so you need to reverse diet. And so we can get into all that, but that is probably just calories and fuel overall is the most important thing. Where carbs come into play are for, there's definitely different reasons. The biggest thing I've seen is with just women who have gone low carb or keto for a long time. Their body can also adapt to that. And also in terms of just recovery wise and kind of when we think about our nervous system, the parasympathetic versus sympathetic state. So sympathetic is, our flight or fight mode, and parasympathetic is that rest and digest mode. I know for myself, I'm a very type A personality, go, not paying attention to stress, not paying attention to sleep. Obviously I do now, but there was a time where I wasn't. And so I was always in that sympathetic state. Like my cortisol was always, all over the place, high. And so that introducing carbs in that aspect, we know that carbs have, obviously when you consume carbs, you spike insulin, and insulin and cortisol kind of have this reverse relationship, right? So if you spike insulin, it tends to bring cortisol down. And so that's one area that could play a big role for someone who is maybe undereating, overexercising, undereating carbs. I don't like to say undereating carbs, but just been chronically lower carb, chronically undereating, all of that. Bringing carbs back in could potentially help them to shift more into that parasympathetic state, and make it a little bit easier. So that's one thing. Another thing, in terms of implementing carbs, some people can just, if their goal is fat loss, some people just don't get that full on fat, right? So just kind of how you are. Like I know for me, when I started incorporating a little bit more carbs, I actually felt more full. That's just how that worked for me, right? I was incorporating obviously whole food carbs, sweet potato, squash, things like that. And my appetite actually went down. So that's another thing. I don't even remember what the original question was, but now I'm just rambling on. So any follow-up?
I follow Rachel on the IG, and I know like when I see your stories and you're in cooking mode, I'm like, save a little bit of leftovers for the
dude. Her for real. So I agree.
Speaking of that, like you are big on meal prepping. Like you have like they're referring to like the Instagram meal prep stories. I'm assuming like a jillion Tupperwares. And I'm coming from a bodybuilding background, have always been about meal prepping, especially when there's a specific goal that I'm trying to obtain. A lot of people, especially in the low carb keto space, are very anti meal prepping because it's like that's not intuitive or instinctive. They like shy away from that. So kind of speak on that. Like why do you gravitate towards meal prepping in the first place? Why would that be a viable way to consume your meals?
I mean, just from a planning standpoint and like kind of going into your week, having a plan is, I think, the best way that you can set yourself up for success. Because, if you have a specific goal, whether it be losing body fat or building muscle and, being in a deficit or being in a surplus or even maintaining, like if you don't have some sort of plan going into your day, that's just so much more effort that you have to put into your day. Unless you are just eating meat and bricks, then that's another story. Or if you are just following a carnivore diet, then maybe that's a little bit easier. But I feel like just going into with the plan and then having, those things available is just, for me personally, like I don't want to think about that throughout the day. Like I have so much other things to worry about. So even if I'm, working from home, which I'm doing, like I have all of my stuff ready to go. Like if I have to, take 5 minutes to cook it or whatever, like some eggs or something, or just warm up in the microwave, it's just so much easier. It takes away that like kind of like just that whole other thought process that goes into that throughout the day. Right. And then it's also, if people are tracking macros or things like that, like if you are just going throughout the day, kind of plugging into MyFitnessPal or whatever, and hoping for the best by the end of the day, like usually, maybe you'll hit that a few days, whatever, but it usually doesn't happen like that. Usually you'll get to the end of the day and maybe you have, this amount left or this amount left. So I think, just from a strategic standpoint, going into the day with a plan and meal prepping and having things available is just smart, so that you don't have that decision fatigue when it comes to lunchtime or dinner time. But that's not saying that you have to this is not saying you have to prep everything on Sunday, but at least go into the day, take that 3 extra minutes the night before and go into MyFitnessPal and go to the next day and just plan out, okay, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or lunch and dinner. If you're skipping breakfast, what's my protein source? That's the first thing. Plan protein. Then depending on where you want your carbs and fats to fall, add in your carbs, add in your fats, and just go into the day with some type of plan.
It's amazing how people, I've worked with so many clients over the years, and they'll tell me what they think they're eating, and then I'll give them macros and have them track what they're actually eating. And it's so astronomically out of the ballpark from what they were eating previously. And it makes my job as a coach much harder because they have no legitimate perspective as to what their actual intake is. But people are totally oblivious to actual consumption, especially if they've never really tracked macros before. So regardless of whether you're in the intuitive, instinctive camp or, track everything to the T camp, simply doing it for a week, if nothing else, and being honest with those numbers is incredibly insightful information.
Yeah.
Especially with the peanut butter.
Yeah.
It's like,
Sure.
I just have like 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. All right,
Yeah.
show me what 2 tablespoons is. And then they whip it out. And it's like, that's actually 4 tablespoons.
Yeah. Also, just to speak on that too, like you said, tracking your food for a week or two. When I start working with a client, that's the first thing we do. Like, I just want to see where you're at, right? Track for a week or two, not only because you're probably not tracking everything, but also because we need to find what your current maintenance intake is, right? Because this is a lot of times I see this, like, there's so many macro calculators out there. There's so many ways to calculate what your maintenance is or your total energy expenditure, right? And yeah, even if it's the best calculator out there, it's not specific to you. And just like we talked about, if you are someone who has been chronically dieting or chronically overexercising, your current maintenance intake could be a lot lower than what your ideal maintenance intake would be, which is what a calculator is going to tell you. So say, a calculator tells you that your maintenance is 1900 calories, for example. This is like maybe a female, 40 pounds, they're lightly active, whatever. But you've been eating around 1,500 calories for the last year, and your body has adapted to that intake. So this calculator tells you, oh, your maintenance is 1,900 calories. So if you want to lose weight, decrease by whatever, 250 to 500 calories, you decrease that. But oh, wait, that's what you've been consuming for the past year that your body's adapted to. You're not losing weight. You're like, what the heck's going on? And you kind of blame it on these other factors. So that's one thing that I found is you have to find out if you have any goal, whether it is to lose weight, to maintain your weight, to, gain weight, if you're gaining muscle, you have to find out what you are consuming now, not what a calculator tells you. And then you can adjust from there, because everybody is so different in terms of their metabolic health, in terms of their, dieting history, their exercise history. Like there's so many variables. So that's just one thing that frustrates me a little bit about those macro calculators.
Totally agree. I mean, I've been screaming from the rooftops for years that people are chronically undereating, and that's jacking up their metabolism, which in turn makes reaching whatever goal, whether that is to build muscle or lose body fat, especially lose body fat, almost impossible until you correct that foundational base to begin with. Having yourself a good, solid metabolic and caloric baseline to begin with is key. Why do you think there's so many women, especially, men are also very guilty of this, but especially you see it in the women demographic. It's like trying to have a conversation with an initial client about increasing their calories, and the fact that they may have some initial weight gain in that process is the hardest sell as a coach by far. But if they don't do that, they'll literally never reach their goal, especially in a healthy manner.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing behind that is just education, and like really explain them like, hey, this is what's happening. And this is what we need to do to reach your goal, or else, it's not going to happen. Or like, I can't help you because if we don't do this, then you're just going to continue to spin your wheels, and it's just not going to be a good situation. And I think the biggest thing is just for females, especially, like no female wants to see the scale go up from what I know. And it is hard. Like personally, I've been in a gaining phase since July, and I've gained 12 pounds and continue to watch the scale go up week by week. And knowing that I'm doing it on purpose, right? Knowing that I'm doing it strategically, still looking at that number every day and looking at that tick up and up, it messes with you mentally. And I think if anybody tells you that it doesn't, then they're full of SISCH. What the hell? How do you spell that word?
Shit.
Caca.
Yes. There you go. I didn't know if we could curse on this.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Whatever. Anyway, yeah, that's what I would say. Just like, I think the scale is one of the biggest, it can be a really good metric in terms of trends, but it's one of those things that just becomes so mentally draining for a lot of females.
Totally agree. I could tell by the way Adam's eyebrows are just moving. He's got a question.
Yeah, I can see that too.
Yes, I've got a question. So we all work with clients. We all deal with this situation where they're eating. Like I had a client that came to me. She was doing a program that rhymes with Bait Watchers, and she was eating 800 calories a day. And
Oh my gosh.
so 800 calories a day. She had lost 100 pounds. But then it had been years since she had lost any more. And she has, more to go on her journey. And I have to have that conversation of like, we got to ramp it up. And she's like, no. I'm like, you can't go lower. How about we do this? How about you don't ever eat ever again? Does that sound awesome? So we have to have that metabolic rehabilitation, that we have to ramp things up. I'm really interested for each of us, like what our strategies would look like in that situation. How are we jumping them up? Are you going to jump them to 1500 right away? Are you going to do a slow creep up? Like with her, what I did was a 50 calorie per week jump to build. And now she's at 1900 to 2000 and she's dropping weight like it's out of style. She's got the gun show going, man. She looks good. So that's what I did. It was kind of a slow drip up, but do you guys have any other methods around that? Rachel, why don't you jump in there first?
Yeah. I think it really just depends first on the person and then also where they're coming from and kind of like the type of reverse diet that we're going for. And when I say type, I mean, if it is someone who has been chronically under eating and their metabolism has adapted to this intake and they're coming to me from there, then I would probably, and I've done a smaller bumps, smaller approach, take it slower. Versus if it's someone who has just come off like a fat loss phase and they're looking to reverse diet, and they've gotten pretty lean, then in that case, I would probably bump them up a little bit faster. And this is what I do, basically bump them up to like their new estimated maintenance or like 80% of that, instead of kind of inching up slowly. Obviously, this depends how lean you've gotten and how your biofeedback is, hormones, all of that stuff. But traditionally, with someone who is coming from a place where they've been under eating severely, obviously we could bump them up a bit more, but it tends to be a very mental thing. And yeah, that's what I would say.
That makes sense. I've got a lot of feedback on that, questions on that, but I know Danny's got questions, so he's just itching over there. I can feel it.
Well, yeah, I just got a quick question because, like, one of the things, and it's like a hard subject to broach with people because, you know, there's your ideal weight and then there's your goal weight, which may not be your ideal weight. And, I don't want people to think that some people are destined to not get to like that level of leanness that they want. But I've seen this, like where, you know, people have gained 15 pounds and let's say it's not muscle, there's some fat, it's been more fat than muscle, but like there's all this function restored and all this, vigor and vitality that comes back. And I've seen it with carnivore, believe it or not. And so the first thing I'll say is, what do you think about that? And is that something that you see with people? Because that's a hard subject. That's the hard thing, the hard conversation to have. And then the other thing is just as far as like, bumping the calories up, I can tell you that there's been times when, I've just said, hey, let's just try this. And it was like 300 something calories more. And they lost weight, they just started losing weight. And it's happened quite a few times. So, it also happens when, if you're doing the diet correctly, or I'm not saying that you're doing my diet correctly, but I see that people will go that slow reduction, and then as we're reverse dieting back up after like a short maintenance period, their body's still like burning so much fat, and it's like, wow, I get to eat more, and then I'm not gaining any weight, I'm feeling good and I'm looking good. So I can tell you that probably the longer way is better, but sometimes I wouldn't, people shouldn't be surprised if they just said, you know what, I'm suffering as it is, I've been under eating and it's been kind of, disordered. So, I'm ready to eat some more. I trust in the fact that I'm eating a low carb ketogenic diet. And what's the worst that can happen? Like I gained a little bit of weight, maybe you're somewhere where it's cold and it's okay, just bundle up. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that first thing? I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, because I've seen that happen, and a lot of the time it's been with women.
Yeah, yeah. I would say, and one thing just to mention too is like a lot of the times I do see like protein being undereaten so much, and you could even increase, like if that's the case, like if I see someone, severe, like maybe eating half the protein that ideally I would want them to eat, just bumping up 400 calories of protein, for example, that we've seen like no, gain from that. Just because protein, like if you're under eating protein, obviously you're going to have some issues there. So that's probably like the first step I would take, is like look at their protein intake first and try to bump that up with from the calories from that. In terms of just gaining, fat and being in a better place, I think, it all comes down to that leanness factor and kind of knowing your kind of body fat percentage floor, right? Like if you are super lean, and if you're at this, like we all have kind of like this floor where we, like you go below that and you're just like, you just feel like crap, or you're not sleeping, lose your period, all that jazz. And I think that's important. And then also just realizing that like being like super lean is just not realistic for anybody, like really, unless you are genetically, gifted. Walking around like you could, go step on stage is just not realistic for most people. And I think that's something that's, social media and magazines and all that crap, like it's just hard for a lot of people to kind of come to terms with that. But I don't know, I would say the education piece of it, and like, looking at, okay, where do I want to be 6 months from now versus where do I want to be tomorrow? Because if you can focus on where you want to be 6 months from now, that is going to make so much more of a difference versus where you want to be tomorrow or a week from now. So that's the instant gratification versus kind of the long-term gratification and satisfaction. I think that's where things need to be shifted.
I think so many people, like for me, I always try and break it down into like having a defined building phase and a defined cutting phase. And that's just made it so much more sustainable and so much more healthy, because then I can embrace whatever phase I'm in to the fullest extent that it could possibly be. And I think if people have like a lot of weight to lose, like, 50 pounds plus, 100 pounds plus, then recognizing that they're probably not going to reach that goal in one cycle is key. Going into it knowing that, hey, we're probably going to cycle through this a couple times, have a cutting phase for a while, then have a building phase where I'm starting at a better position than I started the last time, and cycling through that. It just makes the entire process much more sustainable and enjoyable for the long haul, like you're saying, with that long-term gratification. There's something else I wanted to ask you, but when Danny asked his question, he mentioned vigor and vitality, which brings our sponsor, who Adam, just take it away, Adam.
Great segue, Bobby Bricks.
Yeah.
All right.
Lee, that's good.
All right, guys. You may not know this or not, but February is actually National Penis Heart Attack Awareness Month. And what am I talking about with penis heart attacks? Let me tell you. When the arteries of the heart get clogged up with plaque, that causes a heart attack. But the same thing happens in our man parts, guys. So the next time you look down at your twig and berries, you have to realize that there's plaque building up in there. And that heart attack that happens in your penis is called erectile dysfunction. And if there's one thing that I believe in my heart to be true, it's that when you as a man are listening to this podcast, you should be able to sit there with a full massive erection. And if not, we need to get you on the Gains Wave.
Be proud of it.
Gainswave.com. Like, don't send us pictures. I get enough of that on Instagram. I don't need that. But at gainswave.com, you can now see anywhere in the great United States that you can get the sound wave sound therapy to eradicate penis plaque and avoid the penis heart attack. Gainswave.com. Back to you, Robert.
Hey, wait, one thing, guys. I want everybody to understand. This is also for optimization. Like if you think everything's working well, like take it from someone, me, I'm an open book. I talked about my hemorrhoids last year. So it's not like if you think everything's good, I encourage you to go check it out, because you're going to be like, wait a second, there's just a passage of time. Things happen. It's just not the same. And you're going to be like, that's what 18-year-old me felt like. And I'm just telling you. All right, go on. Sorry.
I don't even know how to bring it back to the conversation.
And back to you, Rachel. Let's talk about female stuff.
Oh, shoot. But no, for real, Rachel, I think, the more people I hear in the space talking about the importance of ramping calories back up, because that is not a sexy topic. Like, that never is the highlight. Nobody ever wants to talk about gaining weight, because with that, there comes some inevitable body fat gain. But if you're building muscle in the context of also putting on some body fat, but everything else is improving, your hormones, your metabolism, everything, then it's a worthwhile gain of a little bit of body fat. So I feel like the more that becomes part of the mainstream conversation, the more it'll be embraced and actually leveraged, and people will actually start reaching their true health goals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think also too, just like understanding this cycling concept, like going back and forth between, building and cutting phases, and kind of thinking about, okay, like where, what do I want my physique to be like in 5 years? What I could do is, maybe I'm, we know that body recomposition is definitely possible, especially if you're someone who's new to lifting, if you're new to just not, just a nutrition plan in general, if you've been under eating protein, like there's so many aspects of kind of this concept of body recomposition happening, where basically, you're simultaneously losing body fat and building muscle at the same time. So the scale kind of stays the same. You're eating around, your maintenance intake. That's like the typical definition. There's other types of body recomposition where it could be like, if you are losing, if you're in a cut and you haven't, had a structured progressive lifting program before, you could be losing fat and absolutely be building muscle at the same time. That's another form of body recomposition. And on the other side, if you're someone who is maybe on the leaner side, and you've never kind of gone, you never really focused again on a structured plan. Maybe you're building a lot of muscle, which this is rare, but maybe you're building a lot of muscle, you're gaining weight from that muscle, and you're not really gaining any body fat. So that would be another scenario. But just talking about body recomposition in general, it is a much slower process, right? So like you could be eating at maintenance and focusing on, having your training dialed in, having your stress dialed in, your sleep dialed in, all of that. And you will get good results, but they'll likely just be way slower than if you were to dedicate phases to cutting fat or building muscle. Sorry, because in that you're actually obviously optimizing one or the other versus trying to go for both at the same time. And I think that there's just so like people just don't understand that. They're like, oh, everybody wants to lose fat and build muscle at the same time. And yes, there is, potential for that. But, 5 years down the line, if you kind of look back, like you're probably going to get a lot better results if you go through these different cycles and focus on one thing at a time versus if you're just focused on both at the same time. Because you are optimizing for that one thing at that one period of time. I think that's just something that a lot of people don't think about. And obviously the side of, the building phase, and something that I've been embracing for 7 months now. It's very kind of like eye-opening too. And, watching the scale go up, it's hard, but watching my lifts go up, PRing every single week, like feeling really, really good, eating a crap ton of food and just enjoying it, knowing that, I can cut the body fat later and, go through that. It's just something that if you don't go through it, you're never gonna know. So
Totally 100% agree. We're speaking the same language for sure. And honestly, too, like you have more perspective overall. So like when I'm in a building phase, for instance, and I go through a period of, several months or years where I'm eating at a surplus, it makes me look forward to being in a deficit that much more. So when that time comes, I embrace it. So many people live their life in limbo. So when they're in a cutting phase, they're never really taking advantage of it. They'll have periods of time where they're snacking on the side, and they never really reach the true potential for how lean they can get because they've never had the opposite end of the spectrum. There's a yin and yang that goes with this. And I feel like when you embrace that fully, you're going to be able to reach any goal much, much more efficiently. And it just makes the whole process much more enjoyable. And when it comes to building muscle, I feel like all of us here have consistently resistance trained for 5+ years consecutively, right? I mean, everyone's done that. When you do that as a natural athlete, it's amazing how you're not going to just put on 20 pounds of solid lean tissue a year. And like the magazines make that seem like the case. That's just so far from reality. So people come into this with this skewed perception of what's possible. And when you first start lifting and your body hasn't ever been subjected to these stimuli, yeah, you can put on some pretty significant muscle in a very short time frame. But when you've been lifting for 5-10 years plus and you have a level of muscle maturity, your shape and form looks different year after year, but you're not packing on 5, 10, 20 pounds of muscle a year. And I feel like people need to realize that too.
Yeah, for sure. And then one more thing to that too is just with a lot of kind of perspective in terms of the number on the scale, what a lot of women don't realize is that if you can gain, like, for example, I put on 12 pounds and I'm hoping that at least half of that is muscle, 6 pounds of muscle, 6 pounds of fat. But if I'm, 6 pounds heavier when I go for a cut next time, obviously I probably lose, when you diet down, get to then probably lose a little bit of muscle, but obviously you want to mitigate that as much as possible. But you will be a heavier version of yourself at maybe the same body fat percentage or even lower, right? And so we know that the heavier you are, the more you can eat. That's just how it works, right? You have a heavier body, you can eat more usually, unless, you've adapted very much, and that's a whole other topic. But anyway, I know that I have a huge appetite and I want to eat more. So if I can go through that process where I'm putting on weight, but a lot of it's hopefully coming from muscle, then in, 3 years from now, hopefully I will be able to be eating a significant amount versus what I was eating before when I was at, a lower body weight. So that's just something too to just think about, because muscle weighs something. It just doesn't, pop out of nowhere, right? It weighs something. And so if you want to build a muscle and you've gone past your ability to quote unquote recomp, you have to see the scale go up or else you're not building muscle.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think looking at, what your lifts are doing, like if you're able to lift with more intensity, have more progressive overload, and you're seeing that trend in the right direction, you can be pretty confident that you are putting on that muscle, especially if every other constant is held, pretty solid. Again, by the look of Adam's eyebrows, I can tell he has a question.
Yeah, he has a question.
What you got?
And for those of you guys listening, I actually just type in the chat. I go, yo, got a question. So that's our little secret ninja move. So Rachel, what I'm curious about is you're on your way up, putting on muscle, increasing your calories. What's going to flip the switch when you decide okay, now it's time to either maintain or do a cut? What's that thought process? I know with Robert, it's competition based. With Danny, if he's got a Speedo modeling photo shoot or something, he's going to do a cut for that. But for me, I'm just gonna be well, I'm kind of doing the bulk thing right now. And I'm trying to figure out when do I know, all right, now it's time, or now I'm going to do a cut. So what does that thought process look like for you, Rachel?
So basically, kind of just periodizing my entire year. For example, starting 2021, looking at, what my year looks like if I have events or things where I, for example, during the summer, I probably want to be a little bit leaner, feel a little bit more comfortable in a bathing suit. And I've already, not even just starting in January, but I've planned this out when I did start my building phase. I looked a year out and said, okay, this is kind of where I want to be. Let's reverse engineer from there. And I do that. I have my own coach, so we work together to do this, but that's another aspect of it. It's just instead of looking at, again, what's going to happen a month from now or 2 months from now, why don't you look a year from now and say, okay, let's periodize this year and see where you want to be. So for me, for example, I have a planned cut starting in the end of April, which will have been 8 months in a building phase. And so by the time I get to summer, I will have dropped a little bit of fat. And we know that the process of losing fat is so much faster than the process of building muscle. It's just building muscle is a very slow, you have to be super patient. And that's why you can't just, one of the things is you have to commit to it. A lot of people are oh, I'm going to go into a building phase. And then they get a month into it and they're oh, I feel too fluffy. I'm going to go back to cutting. And then, oh, I want to go back and build muscle. And it's just back and forth, month after month. No, you have to commit to a long period of time if you want to put on a significant amount of muscle. But yeah, just periodizing my year, like saying, okay, by summertime, I want to, be a little bit leaner, feel a little bit comfortable in a bathing suit, and not necessarily like super lean, like a photo shoot type lean, just, drop a little bit and then just maintain throughout the rest of the summer, and then potentially go back into a surplus, come the winter time, holidays, things like that. And again, just kind of cycling through that, but just going in and knowing, okay, this is what the next 12 months looks like, not this is what the next 2 months looks like.
Gotcha. I think that's so key. I think, people, it's a hard sell because they don't look at nutrition or body recomposition through the lens of this is going to take a year, because all that is marketed is, a 60-day summer shred program or something like that. And people don't look at the lens of this is not, this on a macro level is going to take longer than 60 days. So that's, I think just the marketing and how that's presented is it needs to be shifted, and just needs to be a conversation as how to do this healthfully. So for you, you've got this coming, you got the clients in the works, you got everything going on. What else are you excited about in 2021? The podcast, how many episodes in are you now?
So the 90th episode is coming out on Friday. So
almost
at 100.
Not that long ago, right?
It launched in March, the middle of March last year, 2020. So it's been, I guess, almost a year. Like it'll be a year in March.
So what do you have in the pipeline for 2021? You talked about, your summer plans. You're going to get leaner for the summer season. What about that? Well, from a business standpoint, I love talking business and shop. So what do you got going on?
Yeah, for sure. Also, just to kind of say this too, I haven't fully committed to that cut yet, because I do want to see where I'm at come the end of my building phase, or what's supposed to be a building phase, and see how I feel. Because if I feel good, if I still feel like I haven't put on too much body fat, like I'll probably keep going, just because, and then cut later on. So anyway, but in terms of business, so I'm actually putting together speaking of this, a muscle building program specific for females with my friend Ashley Van Houten. That is going to be like kind of a whole course on building muscle. And obviously we know that the principles, everything is the same pretty much for a female versus a male when you're talking about building muscle. Like that is, the principles don't change, but really just focusing, geared towards females and geared towards, dedicating some time to actually learning and becoming educated on like what it takes to actually build muscle, not just like go into the gym and do a few exercises, but like, what is, time under tension? What technique looks like what are all these things? Like, what do these mean? And what should I be focusing on? Because there's been a lot, like for me, for example, like I've learned so much, and every single day I continue to just learn so much about what I'm doing and becoming so much more educated and intentionable, if that's a word. And every time I go into the gym and every time I go into my training session, and there's so many mistakes and things that I've done in the past that have just caused me to maybe not progress as fast as I could have, and kind of, talking about like junk volume and things like that, just going in and just going and trying to get it done, but without having any intention. There's like so much involved and so many ways that you could optimize. And so we're coming out with a program probably, we're working on it now. It's probably going to be end of March, beginning of April. We're going to launch that, and it's going to be a 3-month program specific to building muscle for females.
That's great. I love Ashley. That's a good combo. That's awesome that you guys are doing something together.
Yeah, she's awesome. We vibe really well together. We're both super like organized and like type A, so it works.
Do you track your training? Like, are you plotting that out in like a spreadsheet or something, just to ensure that you're getting more volume, you're getting more intensity each week? Or are you tracking that with like an app or something?
Yeah, so I actually work with, like, I have my own coach who writes all my training programs for me, just because like I write training programs for all of my clients. So thinking about my own training, I'd rather have someone else do that for me, because they can see things that I can't see, and it's just like a different kind of aspect of that. So yeah, I track everything through like his platform, and just making right now really the focus that I've kind of shifted my, I guess you could say focus over the last few months of just like really, really, really focusing on being like super intentional. Is that even a word? Intentional.
No, intentional.
Why am I saying intentional?
Because
Super
you know that thing that
intentional.
happens when you think when something sounds weird to you and you're
Yeah.
just like, I'm not gonna say that. I'm gonna say this other one, but it's the
Yeah.
first one.
I'll start using that word and we'll make it real.
Intentionable.
I'll use it in the next
Intentionable.
episode. That'll be my challenge. In the next episode, I'm going to say intentionable. It's going to happen.
Okay, so yeah, just being very intentional about what I'm doing in terms of like every set, every rep. Like right now, the focus is building as much muscle as possible. Yes, I want to build strength, but what am I doing in terms of my technique? Like, what are the exercises that I'm like, what am I doing in terms of my exercise selection that's making sure that I'm optimizing what I'm trying to optimize at this point in time? And so that's been like a big shift in my kind of way that I go into my training. So
What is the most underrated training exercise that you are currently doing that most people probably should incorporate into their routine?
So I would say this is something that I've shifted to in terms of like if your main goal is building muscle, like hypertrophy is your main goal, I would say that conventional deadlifts probably just overall are not going to be the best thing just because they tax your body so much in terms of like what you're trying to get out of it. Yes, it's a full body movement. Yes, you're working on your muscles, but I've shifted to incorporating like RDLs in place of my and even stiff leg deadlifts in place of conventional deadlifts. And I've seen a lot more progress in terms of hamstring, glutes, things like that over the last like 5 months. Because my goal right now is specifically hypertrophy. It's not necessarily like building up my deadlift. So I think that's the biggest thing is just like exercise selection has been something that I've been really focusing on. Like, okay, what can I do that is, optimizing my time right now and then also optimizing my recovery for the next session. So I would say that, and then also I switched from back squats to hack squats and really focusing on implementing like focusing on my quads with the hack squats and getting as much knee flexion as possible, touching my hamstrings to my calves every single rep, slow and controlled versus, pushing the weight. So yeah.
I love it.
I agree. Like I just want to comment because people who are focusing on hypertrophy, like I just commented this morning, like I don't like bent over barbell rows. It's too much of a stability aspect to it. Like when I get on machines for some things, like it really does help you squeeze the muscle more. And that's really what we're aiming for. If you got that foundation, you already have built that foundation with your deadlifts, it's okay to do what you're doing. I totally agree with that.
Very cool. Very cool. You got any parting thoughts, Adam?
No, I feel like Rachel rocked. I mean, I'm a little bit disappointed that we didn't get to talk about Lilo. My favorite dog on Instagram is Lilo. She's a dog mom. Like, how has your life changed? Like, we got like 1 minute. How has your life changed since you became Lilo's dog mom?
Sleep has sucked. It was like good for a little period of time and then it just sucked again. So she just, yeah. But she's so cute and it's just hard. She got her teeth pulled yesterday, unfortunately. So she was like cracked out from the anesthesia, but it's worth it, I guess. Yeah.
Like this is the perfect year to have a puppy too. Like all the craziness in the world right now. If you have a puppy to come home to, it's like all is good.
I mean,
like a therapy dog.
Yeah, exactly. Whenever I'm feeling sad, I go to Lilo's Instagram page. Legit, she's got her own Lilo, the golden doodle. I could just go there and I watch her being cute, and it's awesome. So, other than being Lilo's mom, where can people find you online? Where do we go, Rachel?
Sure. So my website is metflexlife.com. That's where you can find blogs, recipes, links to my podcast. And then I'm most active on Instagram, rachelgregory.cns or at rachelgregory.cns. And that's where I'm posting stories of Lilo pretty much every day. So if you don't like to see cute puppies, then don't follow me.
Don't subscribe. All right, Rachel, this is very important. We've never done this before. I didn't run this by the guys, but we're going to get you involved in the big finish. All right. All you have to do is repeat the magic words after me and then just watch what happens. Okay. So just repeat after me. Robert Sikes.
Robert Sikes.
Drop the mic.
Drop the mic.
Are you ready to get lean?
Get strong.
And get paid. We'll see you on the next episode.